Let's talk about one of the most dramatic moves in politics. What happens when a government, facing warnings from its own experts, decides to just push forward anyway?
So, picture this. The elected government has a policy they believe is absolutely vital. But the House of Lords, the unelected chamber full of specialists and experts, is sounding the alarm, warning of disaster and blocking the whole thing. The government has a choice. Do they back down, or do they use a very rare power to force it through? What happens when they pull that lever? Let's dive in.
First off, it's really important to get this. This override power wasn't just invented because the Lords is being, difficult. It was actually created to solve a massive crisis, to act as a kind of constitutional safety valve.
To understand why, you gotta look back to the early 20th century. The House of Lords just kept blocking budgets from the elected House of Commons. It caused total gridlock. The whole political system just seized up. This led to a huge constitutional showdown, which resulted in the Parliament Acts. And those acts are what fundamentally shifted the balance of power and created the very override we're talking about today.
So the key idea is this. The override isn't for your everyday political disagreements. It's that safety valve, right? It's designed for those really extreme moments when the unelected chamber is literally stopping the elected government from being able to govern. It's there to make sure that at the end of the day, the will of the elected House wins out.
Okay, so we know why the power exists, but what actually happens when it gets used? What's going through a government's mind when it decides to go for it?
Well, it is definitely not a casual decision. First, the government has to believe the policy is absolutely essential. Then, they have to be willing to pay the political price for ignoring all those experts. The delay from the whole standoff also has to become so damaging that their hand is forced. And finally, they have to make a very conscious choice to say, okay, we own this now, for better or for worse.
And here's a really crucial point. Using the override, it doesn't make all those warnings and disagreements just vanish into thin air. Nope. What it does is it crystallizes the argument. It takes this messy, ongoing fight and turns it into a single recorded moment, a clear line drawn in the sand.
Which, of course, leads us to the big question: when a government takes this huge gamble and ignores the Lords, do they end up being proven right, or does it all go wrong?
The honest answer, it's a mixed bag. And that's what's so revealing. Looking back, some of these decisions that were forced through are now seen as necessary. But boy, a lot of others age really badly. The thing is, what's fascinating is that even when the outcome is a mess, the debates themselves often hold up surprisingly well. The warnings that were raised by the Lords, they frequently look incredibly smart in hindsight.
You see it time and time again. When a policy goes off the rails, you can almost always trace it back. You can go into the official record and find some peer in the House of Lords who stood up and warned about that exact risk. Even if they were totally ignored at the time, that warning, it's there on the record forever.
And that brings us to the real heart of it. There is just immense value in this whole process of scrutiny, even when that scrutiny ultimately loses the vote.
See, the real power of scrutiny isn't just about stopping a law. It's about forcing the government to make its arguments out in the open. It shines a light on the trade-offs, like what are we giving up to get this policy? And maybe most important of all, it creates a clear, permanent record of who knew what and when they knew it.
So when a government basically says, look, we've heard all the objections and we're doing it anyway, responsibility doesn't just go away. Not at all. It gets sharper. It becomes crystal clear and focused directly on them. There's no hiding. Everyone knows who is accountable.
And that right there helps explain why this is such a rare move. The super high political cost of ignoring expert advice and taking on all that responsibility? Well, that's intentional. That's a feature of the system, not a bug. It makes sure this is always a last resort. So let's pull all these threads together. What's the real takeaway when we look at this whole constitutional safety valve? Well, here are the big things. First, yes, the elected House of Commons gets the final say. But, and this is so important, that final decision carries a ton of weight precisely because it has to be made so publicly against very clear warnings. And that's what makes the scrutiny from the House of Lords so powerful and consequential, even if it isn't the final word. Its job is to create that record for history to judge. Which leaves us with a final, pretty heavy question to chew on. We're asking one institution, the House of Lords, to flag all these long-term risks and ethical problems, but at the end of the day, they can be brushed aside. Is that the best way to do things? Or are we asking it to be both a revising chamber and the nation's conscience, and then getting annoyed when it can't do both of those things perfectly? It's a deep question about how we really want our democracy to work. Something to think about.